Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome once again to another product review. This time, I'm taking a look at a revision of an RPG that I have already covered. This one is the second edition of the Swords of Cepheus. It was produced by Stellagama Publishing, who were kind enough to send me this review copy. It is available in both a PDF and a print on demand. It has been a while since I got this, although oddly enough, the cover, the damage here was actually only done in the last 48 hours, so my bad. As always with these reviews, I will be giving a quick overview of the presentation and format, then give a summary of the contents in some detail, followed by my analysis of the system as a whole at the end and my general thoughts on it. Since this is a new edition of one I've already covered, I will try to point out where it differs from the first edition. However, I may not catch anything or anything, in fact, since it has been a while since I did the original review for the first one. Starting with the format, Swords of Cepheus 2nd Edition, at least copy I got, is a soft cover with a full color cover back and front, and then black and white interior text laid out in a single column format with inline black and white illustrations, mostly stock art, along with the occasional shade indexed table, as well as a nice little detail at the top of the page every so often. This does stand in stark contrast with prior versions, which were a larger form factor, but a thinner overall book. I believe that this new print style makes it much easier to carry, honestly. All in all, the product clocks in at just shy of 380 pages. In terms of content, Swords of Cepheus 2nd Edition has about 16 major sections, along with 2 appendices. There is an introduction, basic game mechanics, skills, character generation, character advancement, adventuring, an optional hero point system, environmental hazards, personal combat, chases and vehicle combat, equipment, sorcery, bestiary, treasure, encounters, and some sample adventure seeds. This is followed by an appendix on super science as well as a list of inspirational media. There is an open game license as this product is based upon the OGL as well as an index. In more detail, before you get into the table of contents, there is a legal disclaimer that has the idea that Swords of Cepheus is derived from the Traveler System reference document. It lays out various trademarks, details what is product identity within this, as well as note that it contains material from the SRD that Wizards of the Coast released into the Creative Commons, which is pretty typical for this system and its predecessor, and gives you a strong idea of what to expect within. The introduction starts with some thematic details, as well as the idea of a sword and sorcery genre, just putting that into mind, followed by an explanation of what a role-playing game actually is. The Sword of Cepheus game is then itself described with a declaration that it uses sword and sorcery, sword and planet, and sword and sandal genres. All three are a related group of genres that arise from the pulp era of fiction in the early 20th century. The main themes of Sword of Cepheus is that of gritty heroism, dark sorcery, and an open world, all of which are described thereafter in case you have any questions about it. There is also details from the system that are listed as examples on how it supports these things. There is some description of the authors, including Omer Golan Joel, I'm probably mispronouncing, Richard Hazelwood, and Josh Peters. And once again, I apologize if I butchered any of those names. The first part wraps up with a quick blurb on Stellagama Publishing and some other material that they put out, as well as the one basic rule that is Rule 0. That has the referee being the final arbiter of any game-related questions. The next section covers basic game mechanics. There's a description of dice roll conventions, which follow the usual RPG format. However, there is a dice modifier for this system, which is explained pretty straightforwardly, as well as a D66 roll, which is simply 2 D6s, and you just read them as they roll. The basic game mechanics follow those of other Cepheus-based systems with a 2d6 throw plus skill plus other modifiers versus a target number. There's provisions for automatic success and failure, guidelines on opposed throws. There's a flat modifier for characters that are completely unskilled in a particular skill, as well as guidelines on how many skills allow you to actually throw again during basic activities that you are proficient in without even bothering with a throw if you're not under a time crunch. I keep turning the page when that's all described here. The advantage system is in certain circumstances just allows you to roll an extra d6 to the roll and then drop the lowest. And there's guidelines for collaborating with multiple characters on a single task. The section finishes out with a table with common target numbers for various difficulties of tasks. The next section covers the skills. It begins with a description of what is basically skills are, as well as how they're ranked. Skills are ranked as either untrained or unskilled, basically trained with no bonus, and then with additional levels that give a modifier when you roll them. The skill list itself then follows, with each skill given a brief description with an example of what can be done with it. And there are a fair number of skills over the next few pages. This is followed by a section on languages that details how many languages a character starts with, as well as an optional way to learn more. And then there's a sidebar on noticing things with either insight, social, or scout, since there's no notice or perception skill in and of itself. Character generation rules are covered next with a brief introduction, are followed by step 1, determining characteristics. Character creation uses a standard array of 6 characteristics that can be assigned in any order, and each one is described further with a name, examples of what it does, what it impacts in terms of gameplay, and so forth. There's strength, dexterity, intelligence, education, and social standing. There's also a few optional rules for either rolling 2d6 6 times to assign characteristics or using a point-buy system. Characteristic modifiers are gone into next, with the table offering a modifier based on a character's characteristics and their particular ability. These are added, in some cases subtracted, from any general throws made with that characteristic. This is followed by an example of how to use a characteristic throw instead of a skill throw. This is done when a particular check doesn't really necessarily fall under a specific skill. Step 2 of character creation are background skills. You pick a particular background, determining where a character is from, being a particular city type, a particular social class, etc., which gives you some basic scores, and certain background skills as determined by the table. Step 3 is where you pick a career. Characters start out relatively young and pick a career and then go through a career path or life path. This is a holder from Cepheus engine, and the characters can continue on that path until they decide to muster out. They select initial career as determined by a step-by-step checklist to get a certain number of skills. Pick 2 from the available skill tables, which may be limited by their education level, and then either raise them or raise one of the characteristics each turn. You then roll on the event table for that particular career, increase the character's age, and then you can decide whether to continue or muster out. In subsequent terms, you do get less skills, but suffer the same risks. And once you have a certain number of terms under your belt, you start risking aging effects. Once you decide you've done enough before venturing, you muster out, which can give you mustering out benefits per your career table. There's some optional rules to determine any additional level 0 skills that the referee may assign, or any others that they may give out according to the genre of the particular game. You then select a trait from the traits chapter and then purchase equipment. There is a master character generation table that tells you how many levels of skills, traits, etc. are listed on each turn. There's an optional rule for level 0 skills based on whether a character is a martial or non-martial type character, with the various skill packages based on what kind of game the referee is determined to run. An optional rule for switching careers, because at default you pick one and you stick with it, but apparently the optional rule lets you switch. And then, of course, the rank that was determined earlier based on your career path and social attributes. Each career is then given in turn with brief descriptions on that career in general, as well as the various skills and events that can be acquired and any mustering out benefits. In terms of careers, there's the barbarian, the commoner, the noble, the pirate, the priest, the rogue, and the sailor, as well as the scholar, the shaman, the soldier, the sorcerer, and the vagabond. There are also several tables of life events which can be triggered by certain events on a career path. Then rules for mustering out, including explanation of benefits, such as allies, enemies, armor, etc., some which may require their own tables. Step 4 of character creation involves determining your stamina, lifeblood, traits, or whatever else is needed, etc. Swords of Cepheus uses a similar lifeblood, blood, and stamina system for wounds, wherein stamina is the ability to take short-term hits, while lifeblood is more long-term sort of thing. Both are determined by characteristics, specifically the athletic skill and endurance characteristic. Equipment can be purchased either off of a table later or by selecting equipment packages, which are listed here and speed up character creation drastically. Traits are then determined. Characters in a career can gain certain traits, and traits can be picked up during play by spending experience. The traits are then described with each one having a name, a prerequisite, and skills or other abilities, and a description of how it works. These can vary wildly and cover anything from what feats and class features might do in other game systems. These include anything from like backstabbing, beast friendship, blind fighting, having a familiar, being a merchant, and so forth. The benefits of these can provide anything from a flat bonus to certain sorts of attacks, to the ability to cast spells or any other special abilities other than what could ordinarily be accomplished. There is an injury table, which follows, since character generation can actually call for rolls upon an injury table to provide lasting injuries to a character as a result of life effects, as well as an aging table for characters that they decide to stay in their career for a very long time. The entire chapter closes out with a detailed character generation example, followed by some non-human careers, which can allow you to play antediluvians, draconids, dwarves, elves, gecko folk, gnomes, halflings, goblins, centaurs, insectoids, revenants, and trolls. Notably, revenants function a little bit differently, being undead versions of human characters and act more like a template placed on a human career path. So they're really more in a set of adjustments. Character advancement is then discussed. Characters earn a certain small number of experience per session, although this can be adjusted by the referee, which can be used in various manners. They can be used to increase skills according to their chart, learn languages, or gain traits. There's also an optional rule to improve characteristics, though this can be rather expensive. The chapter on adventuring then follows. There's this basic idea that adventurers include facing various challenges, and some of these basic challenges are covered thereafter. Dungeoneering section offers guidelines for dealing with stuck or locked doors, spotting secret or concealed doors and traps, and other hidden objects. There's a section on light and darkness, dealing with light sources, how long different types last, what penalties there are, and then rules for rationing, foraging for food, hunting, etc. This includes the minimum amount of food and water that a character needs to survive, guidelines for finding food and water in various terrains, foraging rules, as well as rules for hunting instead of traveling during a particular day. Rules on seafaring follow. These include travel modifiers based on sailing speed and wind conditions, rules for dealing with a gale and other weather-related damage to watercraft, and there's guidelines for getting lost at sea, including how to avoid it, as well as dealing with rations and fishing rules for sea travel. There's a section on swimming and potentially drowning, guidelines on time and movement during the day, or during the game. This includes defining a round as 6 seconds, and a turn is 10 minutes, which is very compatible with the standard OSR material. The section then details how far a character can move during one round, as well as one turn. There's a table on wilderness travel, including modifiers to movement based on terrain and rules for getting lost in the wilderness. The optional hero point system gives a way for characters to get a little larger than life, rather than the gritty harshness that the system otherwise kind of leans towards. It offers each gaming session to start with a couple points per character to use individually, and then a pool for the entire group to use. This can be increased when the characters fail at something spectacular, and the individual totals can increase when they succeed spectacularly. The pool are on a session-by-session basis and can be used to reroll dice throws or get the referee to reroll NPC throws. And there's another variant that only allows for individual hero points. It's very much on par with other games from Stellagama. There's a requisite section on environmental hazards, starting with my personal favorite rules for climbing and falling. Nice. There's diseases and poisons, with tables of sample pathogens that characters can encounter, the effect of extreme temperatures, with a table based on damage, tables showing damage from extreme cold and heat, as well as secondary effects, and then fatigue with its penalties and what can cause it. Fire is dealt with, along with catching fire and what's needed to put yourself out when you get ignited. There's the effects of long-term starvation and dehydration, followed by suffocation when your character is trapped within smoke or other unbreathable material. Rules for personal combat then make up the next section of the book. The combat procedure involves checking for surprise, determining initiative, and then going into the combat round. Each character has 2 actions and can be used for either movement, attacking, or any other material action they can take. Combat continues in that cycle with the initiative staying static between rounds, unless you use some sort of optional rule. And then at the end of combat, once everything is resolved, you have a section on triage and treating the wounded, where you determine whether characters actually died or were just wounded. Combat rounds take place in the standard 6 seconds. Surprise involves a semi-contested check between scouting or sneaking and the associated attributes, with a bonus if you're intentionally trying to ambush somebody, and with the light sources impacting the chance of surprising anyone at all. Surprise simply offers a free round of combat. Initiative is a battle skill check with each combatant throwing their own initiative. Although if the group has the leadership skill, they can grant a bonus to the rest of the group. There is an optional rule for simultaneous combat, wherein combat is resolved in phases by type of action all at once. There is a section on combat actions, which details the various actions you can take during combat, including attacking, charging, which can grant a bonus to hit, but subjects the charging character to potential attacks. Inspire, which can be used to grant advantage to a character's next throw. Generic movement. Overwatch, which allows you to delay until an enemy moves through your line of sight. And then an array of other typical actions you can take that don't really fall into those categories. Melee attacks are detailed next, which is basically a single throw versus a target number, modified, of course, by whether your enemy has a shield or not, or has been subjected to other attacks around each round, since it can be easier to hit if you're ganging up on somebody. Range attacks then follow and are very similar, although this includes range modifiers, obscurement modifiers for the characters you're attacking, as well as prone modifiers. It gives you ideas for using darkness as total cover, as well as optional rules such as taking action to aim, shooting in a melee, using thrown weapons, or using grenade-like weapons, all of which are detailed. With the grenade-like weapons, there's also the idea of being subjected to a blast effect, which can allow you to dive for cover, granting you reduced damage if you are successful. This is also useful for other types of things that have blast effects. There's also an optional rule for dodging and parrying, which can be used against both melee and ranged attacks. The rules for grappling follow, which must be done in melee and give a number of options as to what can be done with an opponent if you succeed. Anything from knocking them prone to disarming them to throwing them and so forth. It can be useful for modifying the layout of the battlefield if you're very good at it, but will require various opposed checks. Damage and healing starts with determining how much damage each attack does, which is done by comparing the weapon's damage rating and the number of dice with the armor rating of the target and applying it first to stamina and then to lifeblood, with the stamina recharging swiftly and lifeblood, well, not. There's a rule for knockdown if you suffer significant amounts of damage, whereas wounds are taken anytime that a character suffers lifeblood damage. Minor wounds apply a minor penalty until you heal, whereas major wounds or serious wounds require you to make a throw or fall unconscious, after which they penalize you for significant time thereafter. Mortal wounds happen when a character's lifeblood reaches 0 and effectively require immediate medical attention or will kill the character. Morale rules are used for NPCs, whereas player characters can always choose whether to fight or run, and include guidance for different types of creatures or NPCs, their morale modifiers, when to make a check, etc. Each of these checks can be determined and described thereafter with a certain set of tactics, so they don't necessarily all just drop their stuff and flee. Sometimes they can actually, be smart about withdrawing. The leadership skill can modify morale, and there's an optional rule for heroes and grunts, which can make it easier to defeat waves upon waves of smaller enemies, allowing for a more cinematic combat style. Healing and medical care are then gone into, with minor wounds and stamina recovery being easy to treat. Serious wounds take potentially days to recover from, and mortal wounds require a roll on the table. Even a character does not receive care in order to determine whether they have been serious or potentially permanent effects on the character. The section does conclude with a quick summary table for the effects of various wounds and a detailed example of personal combat over the next few pages. The chases and vehicle combat section follows. Vehicle movement rules are given for tactical movement, but then chases use a positioning system similar to other Stellagama material, wherein the various skill throws determine the position between a pursuer and target, as well as how far away they are in general positioning. This can modify things such as turret-style attacks or presumably range attacks from one vehicle to another, such as bows and arrows. There is a hard limit on chases simply to keep them from going on forever. Skirmishing and jousting rules follow, which involve various opposed throws, and are rules for horseback and foot chases, which are similar to the positioning system, except it can involve fatigue and other material that vehicles don't have to consider. There's a list of possible vehicle maneuvers to use during chases, as well as their modifiers to various roles, and then there's a section on attacking vehicles, which can be used not only for vehicle-mounted weapons against other vehicles, but also personal weapons against vehicles, and vice versa, since during the ancient era there were less difference in those things. There is a handy table for reference to all the modifiers that these various attacks can take during a combat round. Vehicle penetration and damage is handled as is in other Cepheus engine material from Stellagama, with vehicles taking damage in an abstract way in various compartments, whether it be cargo, weapon, occupants, weapons, and so forth. The effects of the damage are then described for both regular and critical hits. Of course, this is followed by rules for repairing vehicles, which can be handy if your vehicle is damaged and you don't want to just discard it. And then there's the effects of fire on wooden ships, which is a serious issue, especially in this period of time. Then the section closes out with a vehicle combat and chase example over a few pages. The section on equipment begins with a brief introduction with characters starting with a set of clothes and whatever they get from their mustering out benefits. There's a note on technology, since much of this setting it does use a sort of Cepheus engine style set of technological levels, but this particular genre is usually suited for just a couple of them. I was sliding over. I am sorry. I've been done half this review with this part of the book already. The edge of the camera. Anyway, there's a table for conversion for basic fantasy coinage with a few sets of basic OSR style coins, copper, silver, electrum, gold, and platinum coins. There's a section on living expenses offered with a table on monthly expenses, what quality of life they provide, a daily cost if you need it, and what sort of people commonly have that living quality. There's a basic abstract encumbrance system based on a character's strength in terms of number of items acquired, with certain items simply taking more than one item slot or less in the case of smaller, tiny items. There's some consideration for market availability for purchasing items, as well as commissioning equipment, which when you require it. Settlement sizes are given, which can modify an item's ability or availability, or the difficulty in acquiring in a particular settlement. And then this is summarized with an availability table, which basically sums it all up. The equipment section proper starts with personal armor, with a brief description on how it works, a table including the armor type, the protection value, the cost, the general encumbrance, and any modifiers it may make to sneak. This is followed by descriptions of each armor type. The weapons section starts with the weapons aspects, which can include limitations or special uses of particular weapons. There's a section of alternate materials, which can be used to make weapons, and then a melee weapon table with the weapons described by name, cost, damage, as well as what aspects, as previously described, that they may have. Each weapon is then described thereafter in more detail. The ranged weapons table does much the same with ranged weapons, although they include the range and ammo cost. And then there's artillery weapons, which require the artillery skill to use. There's a general table of adventuring equipment offering the items and costs, and a description of what each item can be or used for. Across the following pages, there is food and lodging, which is separate from living costs, since it's the kind of thing you may find on the road or take with you as rations. This includes everything from basic cottages and so forth to more advanced material, clothing, and fabrics are covered, as well as herbs and potions. Once again, just described as costs, and then with specific descriptions of effects given thereafter. Anything from holy water to oil to various poisons and so forth. The vehicle table describes the vehicle, its cost, its agility, its maximum speed, its light and critical damage, weapons, crew required, and cargo capacity. Each of these vehicles is then described in slightly more detail in the following pages. Animals are given their own table as far as cost, their speed, and carrying capacity, and described as well. And after all of this, there is a section on exotic weapons and equipment with exotic weapon aspects above and beyond the normal weapon aspects, although exotic weapons can also have normal weapon aspects. They are listed in a table with cost and damage in various aspects as the prior ones were, followed by descriptions. Adventuring equipment can also be found under the exotic section, which is more complex and more rare adventuring equipment. The sorcery section begins with an introduction to sorcery as detailed in this rule set, with a focus on the fact that it is dangerous. It is a dark art not to be taken without risk. There's guidelines for initial known spells, which can be based on what level of sorcery the character starts with, which is limited to certain professions. There are rules for reading and sensing magic, which all sorcerers can attempt with a skill throw. This can't subject them to side effects, since magic is at work even in a passive manner. The rules for actually using sorcery follow, with any character able to attempt it, although it can be incredibly dangerous for those without the sorcery skill. There's no limit to the number of spells a character can cast in each day, as long as they're willing to undertake the risks. Casting a spell does indeed take a long time, generally a full turn or 10 minutes, although some can take much longer, with complicated rituals requiring a number of turns. There's rules for channeling spells quickly, as long as the individuals allow it, although this can be very, very risky. I mean, it's a sure way of having your character eventually run afoul of the dangers of magic. Casting a spell generally involves a sorcery throw versus a target difficulty, with critical failures resulting in a potential mishap. The specific rules for channeling follow, which add corruption, which can accumulate or is dealt with later. There is the idea that you can maintain concentration on a spell and what you can do without breaking concentration. Armor can impact spell casting, which is detailed here, and then learning spells requires a study, basically a throw and some time. This can be repeated on failure, but each time requires another week and may destroy the spell formula if you fail really badly. Characters can attempt to cast unknown spells with a penalty, although any failure at this point will cause a mishap. There's an optional rule for using prestidigitation or minor magical tricks that do not require the chance of mishap or corruption. The mishap rules are detailed next, with a set of tables that can afflict a character with everything from accidentally summoning demons to forgetting spells to mutating themselves, or permanently adjusting various characteristics and more. Some of these are minor and relatively humorous, and then some of them are devastating. Mutations are then listed in their own table thereafter, which can result in a character drastically undergoing changes, which can have an impact on play. Then the corruption rules involve gradually increasing corruption through both critical successes on a spell or any time it's channeled. And when you accumulate a certain number of corruption points based on your endurance, you begin to get corrupting weaknesses given in their own table. This can actually result in mutations or minor or major cosmetic effects, some with their own effect on a character's skills. The various spell lists then follow. First, there's an arcane spell list, which is the enchantments that can be found in various spell libraries and are basically above board. Magical tomes as opposed to eldritch spells, which are more rare, more powerful, but also more exhausting. These spell tables offer each spell by name and then a brief description of what it does across the following couple of pages. This is followed by in-depth descriptions of each spell, with each spell given a name, a range, a duration, a specific effect, as well as what happens on a critical success. The Eldritch spell list is laid out in much the same way, just significantly later on. Oh, wait, I passed it up. Yeah, the Eldritch spell list, which is right here. Yeah. As you can see, it's much the same way with a spell table and each spell described with a name, range, duration, casting time. The chapter then closes out with a brief example on how to cast a spell. At least I thought it did. Yeah, that's right. Should be like, it's just, yeah, there you go, an example of how to cast sorcery. All right. So the next major section is the bestiary. This starts with a quick guide to the various monster types, including beasts and their various subtypes, as well as such as herbivores, omnivores, carnivores, and so forth. This is by far the largest creature type. There are also constructs, humanoids, outsiders, and undead. Since many creatures do not have education or social status, some of them have characteristics such as instinct and pact instead, which is the wild version of those. There's brief mention of monstrous spell casting, since certain powerful, intelligent monsters can use magic. And then guidelines on reading the monster entries, with monster entries having a set format. This format starts with the size, type of monster, terrain, its type of locomotion, its number appearing, any treasure it may have, its list of characteristics, then its stamina and lifeblood totals, a list of its skills, its specific attacks, its armor rating, its speed, and then its morale value. Any additional powers and abilities are described, and then the actual description under bullet points, and there is an example given. The next several pages detail the various creatures and include a variety ranging from common animals to common fantasy creatures, stuff that seems directly taken out of various OSR traditions, as well as more complex creatures, such as demons especially. They get a more complex entry since they are so variable, as do vampires, though for different reasons. And this goes on for many pages. It's actually a pretty sizable little bestiary, all things considered. The treasure section starts with a brief introduction and then goes into describing the tables for random treasure generation, with treasures given different types based on size, with incidental treasures being the kind of things that just accumulate by chance. Small treasures, medium treasures, large treasures, and hordes of treasures are for things like dragons and other wealthy creatures. The treasure table gives entries for silver, gold, gems and jewelry, and then magic items. There are subtables for the various types of gems and jewelry and for potions, as well as descriptions of what each potion does. And then for the various arcane magic items, there's tables listing the name as well as the basic effect of the magic items. There are also eldritch items, which are way more powerful than basic magic items, although they can accumulate corruption or have other side effects upon their use. Rules for magical research follow this and include the rules for researching new spells and identifying magical items, since it's somewhat difficult to identify them in a sword and sorcery style setting, and then even creating magic items and brewing potions. There's a handy little table at the end that summarizes the cost in terms of in times for doing these. The section on encounters goes over what random encounters can contribute to the game, as well as the benefits and risks of using them. There's a section on random NPC reactions for when you encounter new NPCs, as well as a table in which to roll if you're not sure how NPCs are going to react. There's guidelines for generating encounters, starting with a wilderness encounter generation checklist, basically determining how often you roll for encounters, which terrain table to roll on, determining what kind of creature or NPC is there, as well as rolling the reaction. Then those steps are detailed in their own sections. So after this are group encounter descriptions, especially useful for NPCs rather than creatures, with some groups requiring more detail. For instance, merchants, adventurers, and so forth. The Wanderer encounter table has its own subtable, and bestiary encounters simply reference the previous bestiary section. There are item encounters that can encounter various things like structures, roadblocks, shrines, and so forth. Full settlements are then described in a random generator, since both the encounter generator can generate some settlements just randomly on the map, and you can also use this to just randomly generate your map on the fly. This can be undertaken over a couple of pages with the settlement size, some basic rules for setting it up, and then there's tables for the government of the setting, as well as any crises that may be afflicting the settings, which can be used as adventure leads and so forth. And they can range up to towns and metropolises if you decide to do that. The next section details a framework for creating non-player characters and includes a number of sample NPCs, each in his own table, anything from bandits to bodyguards and so forth over the next several pages. Creating NPC adventurers is a little bit more complex, where you decide the power level or randomly determine it, then determine their role or career, determine their attribute levels or skills, stamina, lifeblood, any special equipment they have, and then tweak them to taste, depending on how detailed you want to get. There's an example on how to generate them, followed by additional NPC generation tables that can tell you what they're about, what their motivations are, their most notable characteristics, and then there's a detailed encounter generation example that closes this section out. The section on adventure seeds then has a set of minor adventures with requisite tables and outcomes given over the next several pages that can be used as examples on how you can put together a minor adventure, or at least the outline of one. These sample adventures have a variety of different genres and even include a timed adventure that develops over the course of several days. The last few sections of Sword of Cepheus 2nd edition include Appendix A, which deals with super science, essentially enabling you to mingle science into sword and sorcery or sword and planet style games. This introduces the scientific factor for each character, detailing how much a character can understand complex technology just by instinct. Generally, where to place super science in a game world, as well as some examples, super science, artifacts, weapons, that sort of thing. And Appendix B, inspirational media, is effectively just the same as Appendix N from the old AD&D DM's guide, except, of course, with new in genre-specific things. Just a list of novels, television, movies, and video games that can be used as inspiration. The book overall finishes with the Open Gaming License, now using version 1.0a, and then there's an index of the contents. So, with that out of the way, what do I think of Swords of Cepheus 2nd edition? Well, in terms of format, the cover art is nicely done. I actually think I prefer the smaller form factor to the old one. It makes it easier to transport around without having to worry about bending it, although apparently that wasn't, in the cards for me. Yeah, sorry about that. Oddly enough, the interior is actually pretty clear, easy to understand. I believe it was easier for me to read than the initial edition. Then again, that may just be my old man eyes. I did see a few minor issues with some of the tables within, but nothing that would unpack the game overall. These are kind of minor oversights that can creep into any project like this. It is written clearly enough that even someone unfamiliar with Cepheus engine-based games can probably pick this up and play it with a few issues. In terms of overall differences with the prior edition, it does introduce a few new things, but mostly streamlines and deals with a few inconsistencies that the first edition had. I believe it would actually play better at a table. Although, if you're perfectly happy with the first edition, purchasing the second edition may not be worthwhile, depending on how much you really want to update your stuff. Most, if not all, of the material that I could see developed for the first edition of Swords of Cepheus should be easily run with the second edition with minimal updates, since there's no major updates needed. Once again, the creature collection is very similar to what you'd see in an OSR style game, although I will admit that it is more focused on what you might realistically encounter in a Swords and Sorcery style setting, with less of a focus on the absolutely fantastical, and more of a focus on the sort of gritty and monstrous sort of creatures that you might encounter, or the more mythological in the line of Sword and Sandal. I will say where this edition advances the most is in terms of magical items and spells. One of the comments I had when I was reviewing the first edition was that much of the magic system in terms of spells, not necessarily the way it was cast and such, but the magic items and spells seem to be modifications or versions of stuff you would find in OSR D20 systems in the first edition. And while some still are, this is mostly relegated to items that are very generic, with a number of brand new spells and spell effects as well as brand new items introduced in this edition. It really is enough to set it completely apart in that regard, and I very much appreciate the effort that had to go into that. All in all, I believe it's a very good product, even though it is simply an iteration of a system that is constantly being developed. Stellagama has a number of different genre-focused role-playing games out now, and each one refines the version that came before it. This is made for a gradually cleaned-up system that is easy to understand, easy to play, and easy to adapt if you've played any of their other systems before. So who would I recommend this for? Well, if you're somebody that enjoys Cepheus-based systems, but are looking for something more medieval fantasy, especially Sword and Sorcery-based one, it is by far an improvement over the Sword of Cepheus first edition, at least in terms of content, like items, magic items, spells, and so forth, as I said. Although that itself is a pretty good system. If you're somebody who's looking for an RPG system that is still fantasy or Sword and Sorcery, but you're tired of the pretty common D20-based OSR systems, then I could see this being one worth picking up. If anything, I would probably recommend Sword of Cepheus 2nd Edition more than I did the 1st edition version for this, simply because it does more to differentiate itself while still maintaining the same basic flavor of play. Finally, if you're already a fan of the Swords of Cepheus RPG but have not yet picked up the 2nd edition, it might be worth taking a look at, although I will admit the advancements aren't so drastic that it absolutely requires you to pick it up. I feel that if you're already a fan of the system and you do pick up the second one, you probably won't be disappointed. It will offer some new material to run in your game, even if the gameplay remains largely the same, albeit a bit more streamlined. And on that note, I'm going to wrap things up here. Again, I apologize for how long it's taken me to get these reviews out. 2024 was just a busy year for me. Hopefully 2025 is going to be better. I'm just basically chain recording a couple of these reviews, so hopefully we get them out pretty soon. As always, I will put a link below to where you can pick it up. This has been the RPG Crawler, my review, I almost said the news roundup, of Swords of Cepheus 2nd Edition. If you like what you see, remember to leave a like, comment, guide, feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.